Hello everybody. Tonight we're going to be working on completing Unit 2 and last week, if you remember, we were working on Chapter 3 and we got a good way into the chapter, and I'm going to pull up the book, and we had just finished this exercise where we got some CSS on the page using basically old-fashioned techniques, getting the code in there. Granted, we copy-pasted it in, but you could have typed it in. And we embedded the CSS into the document, which isn't really the ideal way to do it, but just to show you how CSS works within an environment like this. So I'm going to kind of rifle through some of the overview here for CSS, and I know that you guys know this to some degree, but depending on how long ago it was that you took your Web 1 or how often you actually do web stuff, the stuff kind of slips from memory a little bit over time. So maybe this is just a little bit of like a super quick refresher for you. Generally speaking, the way that CSS works is it works on this system where we use what we call a selector to identify the object on the HTML page that's going to be receiving the styles that we're applying. So the selector will be the first part of a CSS declaration. So that's what they're showing here, is that the H1 is the item that's going to receive this style. After you declare a selector, you put in a set of curly brackets to open and close, and then you start listing your styles, followed by a colon, and then the properties that you're actually going to add, or the actual style or thing that you're going to add to your object. So for example, in this particular area, and I did mess up the terminology there, didn't I? So the first part is the property, and the second part is the value. And then notice that each one of those statements is also terminated with a semicolon. And like many languages that work within curly brackets, this is just kind of an interesting thing to know. That last semicolon is actually optional. If it's the last style that's listed, you can omit the semicolon. What do you think my advice is? Always include it, right? It's just one of those things, because then that's the thing that'll come back and bite you because you forgot to put it in and you added a style in it, and then all of a sudden it doesn't work. All right, so that's the general approach to doing CSS, which you guys should be familiar with. And really the reason they developed this is because we were trying to replace those bad tags that existed in original HTML. I think we talked about real briefly how they had like a font tag, and you could throw colors in and a font face and all that. And one of the first CSS styles they created when they actually had style sheets was the color, because that was one of the biggest things. It's like, do we have to have black text? Can we have red or blue or green? And so that's whenever you see color, it refers to text color. And I know that when I was first learning CSS, I would always start typing text-color, thinking, or font color or something like that, thinking that that was what it was. But color is a weird one. It applies to text, not to other objects, okay? Now, you can add additional styles like we did in our other examples, and basically that H1 selector can contain a whole bunch of different styles grouped together, so you don't have to list them separately like this. There are times when you will see people separate out their styles, sometimes so that they group them into categories to make it easier to change certain features on a site. And I always caution people when they do something like that, but there are logical reasons for separating things at times. All right. One selector that's kind of interesting, and I don't know if you guys are in the habit of using this or not, but it's one that I do use on occasion, is what we call the universal selector, which is just very simply an asterisk. So that means that that style is going to apply to everything on the page. So be careful, obviously, with that one, because maybe you don't want Arial to be the font on the whole site, right? Or maybe you do, and maybe that's perfect. Where I use that one most often is when I do what I call CSS resets, to reset the margins, the padding, maybe the borders, or certain aspects that I do want to apply globally. And one of the reasons I will apply, like, for example, asterisks, and I'll go like margin 0, padding 0, for example. Those are two real common ones that I use, because all objects that have pre-created styles, like H1s are one of them, they have a certain amount of padding and margin built right into the H1, right? In some cases, when you're trying to control layout on a page, that will fight you pixel by pixel. So a trick that designers often use is that margin 0, padding 0, they apply it to the whole document and then it wipes out all those styles. However, if you want those styles in there, then you have to manually add them back in. But the advantage is that it gives you granular control over everything on the page and its placement. It really helps a lot when you're trying to do like pixel perfect placement of objects. All right. Now, we can apply the styles to things that are obviously global with the asterisks or to a specific tag. So we could do an H1 or a paragraph or what have you. But here you see what they call an ID selector. So in other words, we're applying the style to an object that has that ID. Notice that there's a pound sign in front of it, and the little mnemonic device that I always use to remember which is an ID and which is a class is, the pound sign is ID number. I always think of it like that, and then I made that correlation. That's how I got it to stick in my mind, so that might help you. And if you're working with classes, the style or the class identifier will be preceded by a period. The thing that's kind of interesting, and I think we mentioned this last time, is with class declarations, you can actually have multiple class declarations for an object separated by a space. So obviously, if you're going to give something a class name, you cannot use spaces in it then, right? But it is possible to apply multiple classes to an object and also give it an ID. So it's not unusual for something to have an ID and a class or an ID in multiple classes. In fact, the more complicated documents you see, you'll see designers will prefer that approach because then it gives them much more granular control in their style sheet and ultimately a little bit more power. Do I put the IDs together with period? You cannot have that. That's a great question. You can only have one ID on an object. And there can only be one of them on a page. So that's important. With a class, you could have multiple things with the same class on the same page. But any use of an ID has to be unique for each document. So you could repeat that ID on a separate page, but not on the same one. Now, does that mean that the browser won't render your page? Not necessarily. But you have to be really careful, because usually what it'll do is whatever's listed second will take precedence, because it'll read top down. All right, it is also possible that if you have multiple selectors that will receive the same style, that you can include them all in a group like this. So you just list them, put a comma in. So what this is saying is all H1s, H2s, H3s, etc. will all be read. Pretty simple, and that's actually very convenient. And this is one of those situations where you might see, for example, an H1 and an H2 listed multiple times on a page as a selector, because in one circumstance, the font color was grouped, and then in a different circumstance, maybe you set the margin, and in a different circumstance, you set something else. And that grouping kind of will dictate that in a sense. The other thing that you can do, and some of the higher end editors that you'll use, Dreamweaver is one of them, and Visual Studio to some extent will use approaches like this as well, where some of the selectors are kind of auto-named, and that you can get really specific with them by the syntax that you use. So in this case, this selector that you see where it says a section, well, section is an HTML tag. If you're not familiar with that one, you should learn it, because it is an HTML5 tag. So a section with the ID of main content, right? That's the first thing we're looking for. And then there's a space. Well, that's different than a comma, right? So what we're looking for actually is a paragraph inside the section that's got the ID of main content, right? So we can really drill down to specifics without actually using IDs and classes. For my money, I always opt for the ID or the class approach. Brian? Yes, it does. It does. So, yeah, you could not put the P first unless section main content existed inside the paragraph.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense? Right. That's a really good question. So the question was, does the order matter? It absolutely does, because this implies that that paragraph exists inside the section with an ID of main content. And you can even drill down a little bit further. Now this gets to look a little complicated, but what it's saying is, once again, a paragraph inside section main content that's got a class name of attention. Okay. Now, you might not be comfortable looking at selectors that way because not a lot of books teach it that way, but this is perfectly valid syntax. And I might argue if...
Which do you write over your class?
Well, see, Jason, you're leading right to where I'm thinking here. See, because...
There already has to be a class in place called attention that's doing something.
That's exactly right. That's my thinking is, like, if you already have something that's given a proper class name, couldn't you just apply it by using class attention? Yeah, you could. So this type of scenario where they drill down and they try to get really specific, which really should only be used in really complicated documents, right? Because there might be an attention in a paragraph, you know, you see where I'm going with it, right? So that's a really good thought. So just be wary. Now they go through and they show some of the basic CSS styles and, you know, a couple little examples here. I'm making the assumption you guys have already learned this stuff, so I'm not going to, you know, really hammer this down. You can read it. CSS is one of those fields, really like any coding field, where you can actually spend years learning how to master it. I mean, I can safely say that I've been using CSS for, gosh, basically since it was invented or released for public usage, and I probably, even to this day, have not used every single style. Probably a good majority of them, and then they start adding new ones, right? So how do you figure out how to work with these? Well, by just working with them. I mean, it's really what it comes down to. If you have a good book or a guide, that's helpful. But don't ever hesitate, you guys, to go out there and take a look at some of the stuff that CSS can do. And since we're on that topic, and I know that the author is going to start talking about some external websites, so I don't know if this link is still valid, but let's try it. So I guess it is. So CSS Reference on W3 Schools, where they list all the different CSS properties, and then you can click through and see what they all do. And you can see that there's a lot of them, right? You can see that a lot of them also have these categories. So for example, border has many variations, and notice with those variations how there's kind of like extensions to them. Now I'm going to be talking about the CSS Box Model in just a moment, but in essence, all objects that appear on an HTML page appear inside of a box. Everything from a snippet of text to an image to a paragraph, they all have a rectangular shape by default. So a height, width, length, and a position on the page. And then they sit within the page flow of the document. So something that comes before it should sit above it, and something that comes after it should sit below it. That's the typical fashion. Now we have the capability to adjust properties on all four sides. So every object, for example, will have a border, even though, for example, the border on a paragraph is not visible by default. By default, it's invisible. It has no height, no color, no shape, no style. But what this implies to you, if you look at all the variations of border, is that you can control each border separately, top, right, bottom, and left, in size, color, position, thickness. I mean, I just looked through all the possibilities. Yeah, you can make borders out of images if you want. So you can do some kind of neat little things just by goofing around with these. All right, so when you start to style things, you can style things a few different ways, and I managed to get all three of these up on the page at the same time. And we have the ability to use plain text names for colors. So if I went to Google, and I'm sure it's on the W3 site here, but if I just said CSS Color Names, there we go. It of course takes me right back to W3. And here's that this document that they have here that goes through and shows the name that you can use in your CSS if you want to memorize all those for some reason, the hex code that goes with it, an example of the color, and then some of the other little components here. And I'm wondering, because I'm probably at a zoomed in view, if I zoom out, if it'll throw more stuff on the screen. Absolutely not. But I'm going to actually go ahead and click on one of these, and then I'm doing this kind of for a reason, because I know that on this subsequent page, notice that we have the color name, the hex code, and then the RGB values. And notice, and I think we saw this a little bit last week when we started messing with the color palette and the tool, and we started playing with the opacity, how it like switched automatically to RGB mode. And for my money, folks, I like the RGB approach best. That's just my preference. I've been kind of switched over to that maybe for a good decade or so as soon as I saw it. And I go, well, this is a whole lot easier. It's easier to type 255 than it is FF and know that that means 255, right? If you learned your hex codes. So keep those in mind. You can always look at charts like this. There's also, right here on W3 Schools, there's a color picker. Last time I looked, Google just put one right into their search engine, so you can just, type color picker, come here, choose a color, a hue, and it just gives you the code right there, right? So if your tool's not helping you, Google will help you, and there's like a gazillion websites that do it. The other good resource that's out there is, and it used to be Cooler by Adobe, and they changed it to color.adobe.com. And I know I probably showed you this site if you were in my Web 1 class. This is one of my favorites for color picking because it does something a little bit more than just color picking. So for example, the default mode is this. So like if I picked, let's say this one color here. Oh, I didn't know it zooms. How nice is that? All right, so I can pick a color, and then it gives me colors that work with it in various capacities. So for example, if I want to keep like in a one color range but have different types of that color, I can choose monochromatic. Or if I want to use complementary colors from the color wheel, triad, opposites, compounded colors. Now these color schemes don't happen by accident. They're all mathematically interpolated. So math drives it, and it's beautiful because each one of those colors will render itself down here in RGB and hex, and then you can tweak each one also. So it's really kind of neat. So if you're kind of like color challenged, right, and you want to choose colors that work well together, and you know that you like, I don't know, let's say this particular blue, then you can choose these other colors that mathematically work well with it. Not everybody is an artist, folks, right? And I'm going to tell you what, even artists use these types of tools because, I think that yellow looks good with that blue. Or have you ever been with like your wife or your mom or a friend or something like that, and you go to like pick color swatches for paint, and it's like which beige, right? Then you end up just buying white because that goes with everything, right? All right, there are some general rules of thumb. So I always like to show those websites. And then I want you to see also that they include this other approach here where they have the RGB. And I will tell you with RGB, you don't need to have those percent signs in there, but you could do it that way. But if you use the percent signs, it goes from 0 to 100. If you use regular RGB code, you just go from 0 to 255. Now the fourth character in RGBA, the A stands for alpha or opacity, so how transparent something is. Now that can be a neat little trick for really adding a lot of depth to a page. So like for example, you can create a background for your whole website that's an image, a little trick that I use very often. And then you can put like a box over the top of it that's kind of see-through, but not completely. Right? So maybe you'd set your opacity to 50% and you put some text over it so you can like read the text because it has a background, but then you can kind of still see through it and see whatever it is the picture is. And it's kind of a neat little effect. All right, now remember I was talking about those border styles and all the components that go with it. So here's like border with top, width, style, color, et cetera, et cetera. It is also possible with any styles that have that many variations to it to also do compound statements like what you see on top. So in other words, what they did up there is they took all three of these width, style, and color and just said border and applied width, style, and color without actually listing them. But each one of those can only apply to one thing within that style palette. So it's kind of a shortcut technique. And then once you get to learn the shortcut technique for that style, it might be a preferred way for you to work. If you're in doubt, spell it out. That's really it's as simple as that. But it can really save a lot of space on the screen. I mean, if all of them are doing the same thing, it is silly to list every individual thing separately. That's much more efficient. It does the same thing that all that code does. Some of that comes with a little bit of practice. All right, let's talk about the CSS box model. And this is a nice little image, pretty simple, but it gets the point across. So I was mentioning before that anything you put on the page, from a snippet of text to an image to a div to a whatever it is, that would be the element on the page, and it occupies a certain amount of space in a rectangular shape. So, rectangular sides, all perpendicular to each other. Each one of those objects has the properties of padding, I'm trying to find my mouse here, padding, border, and margin. Sometimes those things are invisible by default. Sometimes they are not. So for example, if I set an object to have a border that, let's say, 1 pixel solid black, like the style that we just saw, then that border would then be visible all the way around the perimeter of the object. If I apply margin to an object, it applies space outside that border, whether it's visible or not, pushing away from the object. So if I said like 10 margin top 10 pixels, that means it would push away from that object to the top, to the item that comes before it, and create some space. So create some space. And then padding is different in that it will add space to the object inside the border. But one little distinct difference between margin and padding will change the size of the object. So if I have something that's 100 pixels tall, and I add 10 pixels of padding to it, and I don't declare top, right, bottom, or left, it adds that padding equally all the way around. Now instead of being 100 pixels tall, it's 120 pixels tall. 10 on the top and 10 on the bottom plus the 100, right? That can mess people up, right? They do have some new styles built that force your styles to stay within that 100 pixels. You guys should have learned it in Web 1. If you guys didn't, well, you can look it up. The goofy thing about working with margin, though, when you add a margin to an object, the object stays the same in size. And if you, let's say, add a margin of 10, right, to the top, and then you have an object that follows that, the object below does not know that that margin is there. So now you have to accommodate for that margin on the next object. So using margin can, I'm going to tell you what, drive you a little bit crazy at times, because it's going to move stuff up or down, and then that object might move down and cover up what was previously visible. And you guys may have experienced this effect many times, going, oh my God, why is it doing that? Stop, help, that kind of thing. So when you add margin to an object, it doesn't change the size of the object, but it changes the page flow. So in other words, everything that follows that object will try to behave like that margin was never added. So if it worked perfectly without the margin, you added a margin and it moved it, you better start moving that other object too, because otherwise you're not going to see it, right? So be cautious with margin. You know, I usually like to play with padding more when I'm doing layouts than with margin, and there's other placement techniques that don't break the page flow. So that's an important thing to know. All right, so I think some of this stuff should be pretty intuitive here, you guys, like width, padding, border. So they're putting in the thing here, my div, width 200 pixels, padding 10 pixels, 2 pixel solid black border. And what they're looking at is probably this box, right? That seems like it's about 200 wide, and it's got like 10 pixels of padding on the inside. And you can tell because the border's not touching the word, right? If the padding was 0 and you had a border, guess what the border would be? It'd be touching the word, or just about touching it. It might be 1 pixel, maybe, in between. But otherwise it would be right to the edges of those letters. But that padding, notice, that exists 10 pixels top, over here on the left, on the bottom, and way over here on the right, too. And regardless of whatever that height was, as soon as I'm adding the padding to it, it's changing the size of the object, both in width and height in this case. All right, now before we jump into doing this try it out, I do want to show you one cool website. You guys have probably seen this before, especially if you've had classes with me. But I always like to show this because it really kind of can demonstrate what CSS can do. Have you guys ever seen this site before? Okay, nod and smile, you've all seen it before. But this is a really cool site. It's pretty standard if you take a web class or look at W3 Schools or any like reputable website, they'll point you here because it really kind of demonstrates some of the capabilities of CSS. But basically what this site is a site that's built on a basic HTML document, which you can download right here so you can actually look at it, or you can just right-click View Source. So if you look through here, you'll see that it's just a basic HTML document that really doesn't contain any styles built within it. It's just links, paragraphs, H1s, list items, etc. And then the challenge that the creator of this site did was to put out a request that people take that same HTML and apply their own CSS to it to make something else. So if you guys have never seen this before, there's a little bit of a wow factor. So this is the same exact HTML, just different CSS. So you can see you can create some pretty radically different looks and designs by doing that. And if you click through all these examples, you're going to start to see not only different backgrounds and fonts and colors, but you guys notice that when I loaded this page, how it like faded in, right? Now that's not done with JavaScript, folks. That's just CSS. So CSS not only controls styles, but it can also control behaviors. And this particular page shows it, I think, even better, or it used to. I think they've changed it a little bit. All right, well, anyhow, please feel free to go through and take a look. Same HTML, different CSS. Right? So how do you achieve these kind of looks? Well, it takes a little bit of practice and technique, but believe me, over time you can develop these techniques, and some of it is just real methodical. One tip I will give you as a designer when you're working with CSS: work top down, start at the top, don't start at the bottom, make a plan. Pencil and paper are actually very, very helpful little tools for doing this stuff. And if at all possible, try to find a tool that actually does give you a WYSIWYG CSS capability. The only one that I've really seen that is truly capable in that capacity is Dreamweaver, with maybe Adobe Muse being kind of like a second best, but that works in a little bit different way. But Dreamweaver will show you your results real quickly. The other thing I want to point out to you as well when you're doing design is don't forget to use your Inspect Element tool because you can really drill down to a lot of the styles. So any like object you find on the page, keep in mind that you can access the CSS. Not only can you access the CSS, but you can come in here and you can turn styles like on and off and change them right here and add new ones right inside this little thing and see what happens in the browser before you go messing with your code. It's a really great tool. I wish I had this tool when I was learning CSS to try to fix problems. We just didn't have it. We would just have to code it, pull it up in the browser, and cross our fingers and hope for the best. And then you check a different browser and it'd break, right? I've also lately been re-exploring Firefox quite a bit, folks. And just for the heck of it, and this is maybe 2 nights ago, I was sitting there and I noticed that they restructured their menus again, right? So this is like a more modern version of Firefox. And even though it's taking a moment to load, the thing that I thought was fascinating about it is once it's running, it seems to run a lot snappier than Chrome. Yeah, and I haven't even tried the developer edition. Thank you for that tip. And if you go to the web developer menu and take a look, boy, there's a whole lot more tools here than just inspect, right? In fact, it's pretty significant. And not only that, but they actually have like a whole full-blown web IDE built in. And there's a browser console, and oh my gosh, eyedroppers for grabbing colors, little scratch pads. I don't have time to really show you all these tools right now, but you know what? As designers, you guys need to explore these because the word out on the street is all the heavy coders are kind of jumping away from Chrome like they were jumping away from Internet Explorer a few years ago, and they're all coming back here. So I'll have to check out the developer edition. It sounds very promising. And notice also that if you're in the developer mode, there's also an offline mode for it as well. So go ahead and play with the tools. I mean, even if you just use the inspect tool, you'll notice that the inspect tool here I think is superior to Chrome's as well. All right, just a helpful tip. And of course, by the time people see this video and maybe a year or two down the road, they'll go, look at that old-fashioned Firefox, right? Because it all changes so damn fast. All right, let's go ahead and jump into this first try it out. And of course, they're assuming that we already have our project open. So I'm going to jump into Visual Studio, which is already running, bring it up on screen. And I'm going to go to the File menu, and I'm going to do Open Website. And if you're consistent with how you work, it's all set to go. But what should I do before I start? Yeah, I should make a copy. I shouldn't even be doing this yet. And I want you guys to start getting into that mindset every time you work on coding. And it's like one of those things that, you know, if you were properly taught how to use a computer, even if you're making yourself a Microsoft Word document, the first thing you should do in that document is save it before you even begin. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm going to jump to my file system, go to my Google Drive where I store my stuff. Oh, that's wrong here. Actually, everything's in this folder. So this is the current version of what I have completed so far. I'm just going to right-click, copy, and I'm just going to paste it right back in. And then I'm going to rename, and I'm going to call it Chapter 3 up through page, what page are we on? Let's call it 78. Is that too verbose? Not if you have a problem, you need to come back and find a starting point. So now I have peace of mind that I can continue my work, totally screw it up, come back right to where I started, and not lose like a whole bunch of work. All right, I'm going to go back to Visual Studio now, and then I'm going to go to Open Website. And then I do want to do a little caution here because we had a little brief conversation while the video was paused, and you guys never even knew it, about trying to open up the solution file. Don't open up your solution files, folks, so don't open up like recent files or recent solutions. The best way to operate here really is to go Open Website and then just point to the folder where the root of your site is, and everything will open up just fine. Now, because I'm making copies each time, and I keep doing all my work in this original folder, I'd never have to change this. It's always coming right back to the same folder. And that's just a little strategy that you learn over time, so you don't have to sit there and navigate and change folders. All right, so let's go ahead and open it up. At this point, I'm going to be moving my ebook over to the other screen here. You guys can't see it, but I will be reading from it. So we are at the top of page 79, and the first step is to open up the default page. So go ahead and open that one up. Now I could double click it, but I actually just single clicked. All right. They also want us to switch over to Markup View, so that click on the source button at the bottom so we can just see the source code version of the page. And then they want us to alter the code that sits within the form element. So the form element starts, at least on my document, on line 15. And it looks like they want us to keep some of the stuff. I don't know if you guys are noticing, but here's the book, right? What they want us to do is kind of keep this section, but they're kind of sneaky about it in a sense. You guys notice this little ... here? What does that mean in a coding book? Nope. There's more content that sits here, but we're not putting it all in because it's not worth our time, right? Or we're trying to save space, and although this book is like 3 inches thick or something, so I'm not sure how much space we're really saving. But that ... is not something you're going to type in. That just means and the other code. And in this case, what that means is all the code that's here. That's the ... So they don't want you to get rid of this stuff. They're just saying keep that part and change the tags that are wrapped around it. So really what they want us to do is they want us to add this stuff and replace that div tag. So I'm going to just copy from the PDF. I'm going to replace that div tag and copy all that stuff in place. And I know it looks messy right now and it's broken. I see the underline. But I'm going to paste in the rest before I go fixing anything. All right, so then I'm going to take all this stuff and add that down here. So I'm going to replace this closing div like this. When I'm done with all my cut and paste or copy pastes, I'm going to highlight that whole section of code. I'm going to right click and I'm going to do a format, and it all looks beautiful, just like the book. And if I was trying to compare to the book, that part is my ... So I'm going to put that back up on the screen. So all the stuff that's highlighted here is the ... Okay. Now, if you guys have the electronic version of the book, you can copy and paste the code in, or take your time and type it in. There are some advantages to typing it in that you can get a feel for the IntelliSense tools as you're working with them, which is not a bad thing, but absolutely not necessary to work with this content. All right. The next thing they want us to do is they want us to jump over to the styles sheet that we created. So I'm going to the styles folder and I'm clicking on styles, and you notice that document is empty, right? Did I do something wrong? Nope. That's exactly what we're supposed to do. If you notice in the book, it says if you added some code to this file earlier, remove that code first. All right, so they want us to start with a blank slate. All right, at the top of the CSS file, I'm actually going to type this in because there's hardly any. I'm going to add a style for header. I'm going to add my curly bracket. Then I'm going to press enter to create a space in between. Visual Studio closes the curly bracket and formats it for me automatically. Now, this next step, which is step number 5 at the top of page 80, is the one step in the book where I probably get the most emails from people, and I'm surprised I haven't been completely flooded with them yet, right? And you guys are all looking and nodding, and it's like, I'm waiting for the answer. Please tell me. Right, because it says position your mouse between the curly braces, right-click, and choose Build Style. Well, that's not happening, is it? Right? And I know the one guy that figured it out all on his own is like chomping at the bit to tell me. And Brian, how do I get there?
You have to go up to, where is it?
Right. That's right. It's not. Yeah, it's not there, is it?
You have to go to the design mode.
Right. Either the design mode or back to the HTML.
Oh, I guess that.
Right?
Format.
Right. So if you go back to the HTML and you hit Format, you're going to see that they have this thing for New Style, which for some reason right now I can't click on it.
You have to be in design mode.
All right. So I have to be in design mode for Brian, and then I can say New Style. So I can click on that New Style, and now granted, we're not landing inside the selector that we want right now. In fact, it's just kind of putting us wherever. That's okay. You can switch. You can just go right up to the drop down and find header. And see, isn't that cool? It's all listed. So even stuff you haven't added to your page yet. Then you'll notice that if there is stuff that you've added to your page that will be like a little indicator for it, but we want to have the selector for header. Now, if that style already exists in the document, it will pull those features in. If it doesn't, it will add it to the code. That's kind of the point here. So this tool still does exist. The way you get to it is different. So you have to be inside the HTML document, either in design mode or source code view. I think either way will work. As long as you can get that format menu and use style. All right, so once you have that up and running, we're off to step number 6. And what they want us to do is on the left-hand side here in the category list, they want us to click on background. All right, and then open the drop-down list for background color. I guess I have to finish that, right? And they want us to click silver. Silver is actually this one here in the list. See where my mouse is? So there's one that's already pre-configured for silver. So I'm going to go ahead and click it. And then notice it drops in the hex code for silver. Also gives you a little preview at the bottom of what that kind of looks like. Everybody okay? You want me to do that one more time? Only if you pay me extra. All right, so I switched over to the page. I switched off the CSS page and I switched over to the page. And you can do it either from source code view or from design view. Either one, doesn't matter. But you just need that format menu and then choose New Style. It brings up the dialog, and then from the drop down at the top, you'll select header, because that's what they told us to do. But you can see that you can select anything, right? And we're going to click on background. We're going to hit the drop down and choose silver. And then we're going to jump over and we're going to start choosing some other styles here too. So we're going to do position. And with position, let's see, under width, enter 844. 44, and they want us to leave it at, make sure it's pixels, but notice that you could switch it to ems or picas or percentage, whatever. And for the height, enter 86 pixels. All right. Now, the other thing I want you to notice here, because the author was working directly from the CSS document to trigger this interface, it's going to end up in a CSS document. That's the whole reason he was doing it. But for us, are you guys noticing? Define in current page, what would that do? Yeah, put it right in the HTML. Not what we want. So what we would prefer to do is attach to an existing style sheet, and then we should be able to find it in the list here, or click Browse, and if you organize your stuff logically, it should be just a couple of clicks to find it. Notice down here, Okay, yours is grayed out. Interesting. Give me a second to finish clicking OK, and then I'll come and help you. Notice here at the bottom where I highlighted, it shows you a preview of the CSS styles that it's adding to the document. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and I'm just going to jump over to the CSS document really quick and just confirm that it added the style for me. Now, it made the previous bit that I added irrelevant. You guys notice that? So I'm actually going to delete that. And I'm going to pause the video momentarily to come and help those that are having issues. All right, if you guys have successfully completed that step and you got this into your CSS, in step number 8 on page 81, they want you to repeat those steps 4 through 7, basically getting into that style palette and then adding styles like these here. Now, there's a temptation, of course, that you can just copy paste this in and be done. But the whole point is they want you to use the tool, right? So I'm not going to really talk my way through this. I'm just going to kind of have this off on my second screen, and I'm going to try to add each one of the styles. Well, although it does say here you could type this code in directly in the code editor. So I'm really tempted to just do that, but I think that really what they want you to do is come up here, format, new style, and then just go through. And I'm looking here to see, do they have a universal selector actually available? I don't think they do they?
It's when you just go to new style.
When you say style, it says it tells it makes a class new style 1.
This seems like a cumbersome process if I have to select the style sheet each time. So, is there a shortcut for that? Probably. All right, but I'm going to go ahead, and they want me to use the universal selector, and for the font family, they want Arial. And notice they're not giving like more than Arial, just Arial. So I have to find just Arial. So I'm going to apply that. And then instead of closing the palette and reopening it, I'm just going to leave it open. And I'm going to add a style to H1. And now it just assumes an existing style sheet. And all right, I'm not really sure I'm liking this. Can you see why? Because it looked like it was trying to force that onto the H1, so it seems like I am going to have to go in there each time and do that. So if you want to just get the practice of working with it, that's fine. The other thing that I'm going to do is actually, and I'm sure they're going to have a step here, yeah, and they sure do, but I'm going to actually save a step. So what I'm actually doing right now is I'm jumping ahead to step number 10. And watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to actually grab this style sheet that's in the styles folder, and I'm just going to drag and drop it into the head section of my document. And it should create a link for me, just like that. Now the reason I'm doing that is that way when I go back and I save the document and I go to the format menu, it's already recognizing that it's attached, so I don't have to go through that process of reattaching it each time. So that's just a little trickery on my part to save a little bit of hassle. All right, so H1 this time, and with H1 they want a font size of 20 pixels. All right, and then they want 20 pixel font size. And then the next one is page wrapper. For that they want a width. Okay, so that's under position of 844. Oops, that was not good. See how it just grabbed part of it? I must have hit the mouse pad or something while I was typing that in. So I'm actually go back now and try to add that again. And I'm going to save it to make the new style available again, if you guys are wondering what I'm doing here. Now, I fear that this tool, although it's cool, is also kind of a little bit primitive. Like, it's not finding my previous edition of this. So I'm going to have two page wrapper styles now. And they want the margin margin set to auto. All right, I'm going to go look at my style sheet because I know I have two entries here. Now I'm going to tell you with the simple styles that we're adding, it's probably easier to just copy paste them in, but you can continue with that process if you'd like. So I'm going to go back, choose Format, New Style. This time I'm applying it to the nav. And the nav's got a width of 844. Seems like a lot of objects do. They could probably save some code. Section main content. And this is where I'm actually going to first select, I guess, select section from the drop down. Like this. And then just type in main content. And once again, under position, we're going to have a width of 664. We're going to go to layout and choose float left and click OK. The next style is going to be aside. So we're going to find aside. Background color. Could I just type in gray? You sure can. Position width is 180 pixels. Our layout float is left. And then finally we're going to add a style for footer. And for that we want a background color silver, CO. A width again of 844. And then a position clear both, which clears the floats. And then if you did everything correctly, your style sheet should look similar to this. So I'm trying to get it all into view at the same time. And what I'm doing is I'm actually now comparing to what's in the book to make sure I didn't mess anything up. As you can imagine, as soon as you start throwing in floats and widths and stuff, you know, that's going to start to control the appearance of your page in ways that might break if you don't have this stuff in correctly. All right, I'm going to go ahead and actually click the Save All button at this point to make sure, and I'm going to cancel saving the solution. And notice it's still saved, I just don't want a solution file at this point. So that completes step 8. And step 9. Step 9 is to save it, which I just did. And we already did step 10, which was to link the style sheet, and we did it preemptively to save us a little bit of code. One thing I do want you to note is how in the older version of Visual Studio, and really the older, the pre-HTML5 standard days, you would have to include this type declaration within the link, and these days you don't. You can just do it without. You just need the link, and then you need the rel tag. All right. The next step is step number 11, and this is actually kind of a unique step, and how necessary this really is really kind of depends on a couple of different factors. In essence, what we're going to do in this step is we are going to add an external package that loads a library that makes Internet Explorer behave like it's HTML5 compliant. Yep, it's the Modernizer JavaScript library. Now, if you know you're coding for an audience, especially like in a corporate or enterprise environment where people are going to be stuck using certain versions, this will come into play. For general publication, though, I would say know your audience. Like if you were writing, a website for, like the Internet Explorer fan page or something like that, you probably want to use the Modernizer library. If if you're writing something for like an Apple audience, you might not. Okay, so just keep that in mind. But it is important to know about this tool because a lot of designers will swear that you have to do this to be safe, and it probably is a best practice. But I think in this modern day, things have really changed a lot. All right, moving that back off to the other screen, and we're going to do this in kind of like a weird way. Because there's a couple different ways to add what we call packages to projects. And one method is actually to go to your project, right-click, and then find what they call the NuGet packages right there. And really, folks, you can do this step right from that menu, right? But they're showing you the old-fashioned approach, okay? Which still exists, and it's good to know. So it's not that you couldn't do it this way. You could absolutely come in here, choose that. Of course, they want us to save it. So I have to save all and do a solution. Okay, fine. Right-click. So I'm just going to show you how to do it this way, just in case. But if you want to look at packages, you just come up here and just start typing modern. And then you'll see that, well, maybe it's not listed here. There's something wrong. Okay, so so here I am trying to be all slick, and it's not working, which of course is poetic. And maybe that's why they're having us do it that way. So it's not coming up from the NuGet. Okay, well, of course I'm certain. Oh, there we go. All right. For whatever reason, it was just being kind of goofy. But you can come in here and choose the Modernizer library. You click it, you just click install, and it will add it. That's one way to do it. And truth be told, unless it's not listed in here, this is the way I would do it. But they are showing you the old-fashioned approach, which is just basically good to know. And that's where you go to your Tools library, and then you go to Library Package Manager, if that's even listed here anymore. And actually, it's NuGet Package Manager. But we want the actual console. So you can see this is a difference in the versions. So once you pull up the console, of course a console, you guys should know at this point, is basically a command prompt, right? And you can install any package that you get through that NuGet Package Manager, if you know its name, from the command line, like this. So the book says you type install with a capital I, dash package, space, and then the name of the package you're adding. And notice Modernizer doesn't have an ER at the end. It's just M-O-D-E-R-N-I-Z-R. And then you just press enter. And then what it does is it basically goes through and tries to install the package. And I'm not really sure that it's even working at this point, or is it? You guys tell me. Did it work? Yeah, install failed, rolling back, does not exist in project site. Yeah, you guys are clearly doing better than me. So I'm going to try that again. I'm going to click on site. I'm going to actually close the interface here. And I don't know if it's because I maybe hadn't had that selected, but let's try it again. So we go to the console. I'm going to type in the command. I'm making sure that everything was typed in correctly. Do you guys see any typing? Yeah. So for some reason, for me, it's not working. Now you guys are saying it's working for you? Okay, well, good. So instead of freaking out, I'm just going to right-click and come back here and do it this way. Right, since we know how it works. And they want us to install the old classic version of it here. Now the one that they're installing in the book is version 2.6.2. The one that's here is 2.8.3. And then I'm noticing that the same authors also have a newer version. So I'm curious what the difference is. Yeah, it'll be added to your scripts folder once it's added. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and select it and choose install. And then I'm going to say OK. All right, and then it is throwing a couple of errors here. Oh, okay, well, I'm not worried about those. I know that I put them in that way, so I'm not worried. And it's telling me that some of the styles I have put in there, it doesn't like. So I'm just going to hide that as if it doesn't exist.
Can you just write the script for the modernizer so it goes out and finds the URL opposed to installing it?
Yeah, you absolutely could. You're right on target there. You could absolutely do that. All right. So did you guys succeed with your install? And how do you know it's installed? All right. And where do you find it? And why don't I have a scripts folder?
I actually had to create one at some point.
Yeah, I have to say I'm a little concerned because it doesn't seem to be updating. So I'm going to hit the refresh here.
I don't remember where I created it. I don't remember if it was on this plan. It must have, because I'm not looking at it.
Can I have a scripts folder too that might have one of the steps?
Yeah, it might have been a step that I just, skipped? All right, so here's what I'm going to do, folks. I'm going to make a scripts folder. All right, new folder, scripts. All right, so you're saying now if I type in that command line, it's going to work? Nope. All right, so we try the package manager again here. Let's do it this way. It's interesting the mistakes that it's. I think what it's saying to me is that it's not installing it because of a couple of my CSS styles, if I'm reading that right. So guess what I'm going to do? This is not something that you guys should have to do. It should just work. But this is how you would do this professionally if you were trying to hack it. I would comment out the styles it doesn't like, which was this one, right, the universal selector. Which was the other one?
Yes, that
Yeah.
section we can't comment.
Yeah. So I'm just going to comment these two things out for right now. And I'm going to run it again. Yeah. It's basically what we're doing is we're like tricking it into doing it as opposed to it just doing it. Like the styles being wrong should cause a problem.
Looks like it's one.
Looks like it's doing it, right? I just wonder if I'm like losing internet connection here.
I don't think it's an issue.
Yeah, it's just not working. One error, 2 warnings. Let's see how it can go back versions. All right, so when it's not working like this, folks, I had this thought that I'm going to try it one more time because my CSS file was not saved. This is great when you watch your instructor fumble like this, right? Makes you feel better. This is fully qualified error ID. NuGet package management PowerShell command. Let's install package command. Okay, so it says to me that the install package is not being specified. I see it specified, don't you guys? Spelled correctly. All right, here's what I'm going to do. My next last-ditch effort is to close Visual Studio. It's pretty extreme, right? Not really, right? 'Cause sometimes things get hung up in memory like that. And then I'm just going to reopen it. That would be, yeah, that's not a bad thought, too. You could always do a rebuild on the project. And let's see if this will fix it. Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah. You're right. It looked like it was like there was something in there. So let's try it with the command line again. So it's install, right? Tell me if I'm spelling this wrong, because I'm assuming that it can type correctly. Right? Modernizer without an E. Still throwing the same error for me. All right, we'll try it from the package manager. I feel like I'm going to be on Stack Overflow in a minute trying to figure this out. You know, I'm tempted to maybe just try like the new one. Should I try that and see what happens? I mean, what the heck, right? So now here I am reading the output. Install failed, rolling back. URI formats are not supported. All right, well, I'm going to have to investigate this, folks. There's different ways to do this. You know what the other ways to do this are? You can manually download the JavaScript library and drag it in. So I'm not really too worried about that. You guys probably got it to work, so I probably have some issue that's blocking me, and I don't want to spend my whole night figuring it out. If you are also stuck, let me know, and I'll help guide you through it. But let's just assume that I added it. Are we good? Okay. Step 11, check. All right. Once you got that added in, what we need to do next is uncomment the stuff we commented out here. Save it, and then they want us to go ahead and launch it in the browser. And then they may make a point of wanting you to launch it in Firefox. And then, you know, what you do is you launch an Internet Explorer and see how it looks different. So here's Firefox loading up the page. It should look something like this. I know it's a little on the ugly side right now, but we do have a basic layout that we're working with, and we're going to keep building on this layout following the instructions in the book. Well, after a little bit of wrestling with Visual Studio and a couple of the config files and the solution files, I did manage to get the Modernizer library added in successfully, so I'm hoping that that will prevent future problems. I just wanted to give that little follow-up before we get close to wrapping up here for the night. All right, folks, at this point we're running out of time in the classroom tonight, and we're kind of leaving off at this point where we got that Modernizer library put in. That's what I was just talking about. And I was kind of scrolling back to see how far we got, and I was just about to start this next try it out, and we realized we ran out of time. So if you need support finishing the rest of these, what I would ask you to do is jump to the archive videos where I have completed these steps already, so you can use that as your support. If I get a chance this weekend, if I have some downtime, there's, you know, between shoveling snow and whatnot, I'll try to record the rest of the chapter for those that really need it, but I'm sure that the older videos will help you out. But you should have enough to, at least at this point, get rolling with your work, and good luck on finishing the rest of the chapter.